Welcome to the Victorious Souls podcast with me, your host, Danielle Burnock from DanielleBurnock.com, that lady on the internet who loves you, connecting you to the love that heals so you can go from survive to thrive. You can learn how to love yourself. Today, my guest is a homeschooling mom of 8 who also has a therapy degree and is certified in the trauma healing method, but she's going to be sharing her story of trauma recovery and what she's doing to help others. So thank you for being with me today, Kim. Her name is Kim Nave. I didn't say that earlier, but thank you for being with me today, Kim.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you have quite the story and to tell it, and I'm really hoping this is going to open some people's eyes who are living in that darkness that you lived in for a while. But before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about your background growing up and what you've been through, or your family, whatever you want to share.
Well, I was an only child. Excuse me. Well, I thought I was an only child for most of my growing up years. My parents divorced when I was 2. My dad went on to have more children. My mom never did. So it was just me and my mom. She remarried when I was like 7. And I think it was probably about that time that I realized, and I think this is the time when all kids do, that maybe mom wasn't perfect. I was molested the first time, just realized actually recently that I was molested the first time when I was 2, and then again when I was 8, and that one I have a very vivid memory of. I did not tell my parents because I thought it was my fault, as is commonly what happens with being molested. And I told my parents about a year later, and my mom said, okay. And that was the end of it. And so for years, I thought that that was the end of it.
Wow. She said, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I struggled for years making excuses for things that my mom did. I know now that my mom had a lot of trauma herself growing up. My grandfather was an alcoholic. He had PTSD, which really wasn't a thing back in the day from World War II. And so there was a lot of trauma in her history. And so she perpetuated it because that's what happens. What she had done was gone to my dad. And told him what happened. And my dad was very angry. We'll leave it at that. And they looked into it, and the guy had already was in a mental health institution. He apparently was very mentally ill, which they didn't know at the time. He was a babysitter. But my mom didn't say anything to me about that for years. I think I was in my 30s when she finally told me that part. But growing up, my mom was very emotionally, very verbally abusive to me. I was not allowed to have my emotions, my own thoughts, my own feelings, my opinions, nothing. I had to mirror what she felt. And if I didn't, then I got in trouble. And she was not physically abusive. I think the only thing I ever remember my mom doing physically was washing my mouth out with soap. Other than that, she was not physically abusive, but the verbal abuse was there was a lot of name calling. There was a lot of putting down. There was a lot of being told that, and it was weird because she would tell other people how proud she was of me. I was a straight A student, and she was so proud of me. And behind closed doors, I was an idiot and a fool and a goofball. I think that was her favorite. She at one point told me that I would never, nobody would ever date me because I was too goony. And these things, I didn't know they were abusive at the time. And, there was this kind of love-hate relationship that ended up coming out of that. So I got saved when I was 11. And at that point, my parents and I started going to church. And that was an interesting contrast, because at home it was hell. And then we would go to church, and we used to call it picking and grinning, because my parents would fight or scream at me the whole way there. And we'd walk into church, and my mom would go, "Hi, how is everybody? We had such an awesome week." And I'm going, "Wait, what?"
Wow. Such deception.
Very much so. And it was all, again, here I go making excuses for my mom, because this is what we do. it was just her way of dealing with things.
It's
So
hiding. People do that, they hide.
yes,
A lot
yes,
of the hiding is driven by shame, and shame is a side effect of trauma. So we have
yeah,
to go all the way back to the beginning to get to the
yeah,
root of things.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
It's not
Um,
so much right now. I don't think that you're making excuse for
mhm,
her. It's more like it's now I understand why. That
yeah.
doesn't make it
Oh,
right,
absolutely.
but
There has
now we understand why.
Yes, exactly. And in my healing journey, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but in my healing journey, there has truly been a lot of healing. My mom passed away in 2019, and um, God is good because it was healed before she passed.
Oh,
Um,
wow, that's
but
wonderful.
even more so since then, I had the privilege of taking care of my mom in her last days.
Wow. I can relate to that. I was able to do that too. My mother and I, we didn't have the same kind of story as yours, but we had our own mess. And we didn't, we had a relationship because of all that coercion and authoritarianism. So it wasn't like, oh, we are just so close. But we went through a period of healing that she actually instigated, which was amazing. So I always celebrate and sing her praises because of what she did right, because we can all complain about what people did wrong.
Sure.
But she did some things right. She did that right. And we built a bridge, is how I say we built a bridge between our two islands of pain. And we
Yeah.
healed that. And I got to help my mother in her last days. I was actually with her when she passed. And when you've been through that pain and that separation, and you are able to partake of healing and have that, it's really a gift. It's really a gift. So I celebrate with you, and I'm getting goosebumps all over my body just thinking about it.
It was priceless, and I'm grateful.
Yeah. As here, well, I'm going to stop for my listeners here. There's hope. There's
Yeah.
hope.
Oh,
Every time I find a
absolutely.
story like this, if both sides of the relationship are interested in the healing, healing can happen. It takes
Absolutely.
work, it takes talking, it takes going through it. But if both sides are willing, there's
Mhm.
hope. If there's
Yeah.
just one side, unfortunately, that doesn't work because it does take two. But
Yes.
there is hope. So maybe
Yeah.
if you have a one-sided thing going on, maybe you pray, oh God, make them willing. And
Yes.
he won't manipulate people, but he can draw
100.
us with loving kindness. He draws us. So
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um,
so you were
yes.
going to church, you were talking
We were
about
going
going
to
to
church.
church
Yes.
and it being all weird
Um,
because at home it was awful. And at church we're like,
yeah.
oh, we're like little plastic Barbie and Ken
Yeah.
dolls.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was that the churches that we went to were very, very legalistic, very religious. And so it was kind of odd that what was happening at home was being mirrored at church. It was that same um I don't know, I'm not even sure that I have words for it, but it was the same the same authoritarianism, the same rules, the same um
Oppression.
yes, that's a good word for it. Very much the same. And we went to those two different churches, the same denomination, for about 6 years. Tied me up in knots horribly, which I didn't realize at the time because I was just trying to find, I was a teenager at that
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
and
We
trying to
don't know.
find
It's
me.
just our normal.
Yes, yes. And I remember specifically at one point, I didn't have a whole lot of friends, because I was Goonie in high school. I didn't date until I was a junior in high school, and that was a whole mess in itself. But I was very close to one of the teachers, and in a conversation about a Bible verse that I had brought to her, I said, I was reading this, and I was so excited because look, here's this. And she said, oh, that's not what that verse means. And the way that she described it was very rule oriented, very legalistic.
Mm.
And so back into my little box I ran. And that's where I stayed for a lot of years until I don't think there's any other way to say it, but I gave God the middle finger and went my own way and said, I'll just do this myself. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
Because
it's
if
like
you're
you
going to
give up.
torment
It's like
me,
I
yeah,
can't perform.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't do this, which
Well,
is the whole thing why Jesus came, because he
yeah,
knows we can't. He
yeah,
knows we can't.
Yeah.
It's, we need to know we can't, but then those kinds of religious environments with that deception, they make us feel like we're supposed to, but we're not
Yeah.
supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really, for years, until probably very recently, thought of God as this old man sitting on a throne in heaven, waiting, just waiting, like Zeus with a lightning rod to throw it at me every time I screwed up. And I screwed up a lot. So I had a lot of lightning rods. Um, fun fact is, in the end, I realized, ooh, I did all that stuff to myself. It wasn't God after all. But because of what I had grown up in, that's what I believe to be true.
Yeah.
So in my running from God, I met my ex-husband, and we moved in together. We lived together for a year. There was all kinds of shame in that because that's not what good little girls do.
Well,
Um,
you weren't practicing being a good little girl at this time. You were practicing that middle finger.
yes, I was very much so, very, very much so. And in college, I got into drinking. I got into drugs, tried them a little bit, didn't really care for them so much, but the drinking I got along with very, very well. Um, to the point where, I was underage and that everybody at the bar knew that I was, but they knew me. So come on in. They could make a quick buck off of me because I could drink. I could drink well. Um, so I left college after a year and a half. It wasn't what I wanted to do. Met my ex-husband. We got married, had 8 amazing children. And there were so many red flags as I look back, screaming, yelling, waving, throwing themselves over my head. And I just kept going, oh, no, 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 no. I can explain that away too.
Oh, because
Um,
you were accustomed to that.
yeah,
You grew up in a home with that kind of emotional volatility. So it probably felt kind of normal.
it did. It did very much. Well, and there was a point where he was never physically abusive. Well, I say he wasn't physically abusive. And jumping ahead again, he was sexually abusive, but I didn't realize that at the time. Um, and there was a conversation I had with my mother because my parents did not like him. Walking down the aisle, my dad said, "We can turn around now." And I said, "Oh no, Daddy, I love him." Okay. So, but there was a time where my mother was just so angry with something that my ex-husband had done. And she said, "You need to make him change." And I said, I can't do that. And she said, "Oh, yes, you can. That's your job, is to make him change." And so that's what I did for years, was try to make him change.
Wow.
So I did what my mom taught me to do, and I manipulated and I controlled, and I was ridiculously codependent. I'm pretty sure that my family's picture is the one that you see next to the word codependent in the dictionary. So just wave as you pass it. Um, so that's what I did, is I manipulated and I controlled, and so it was a power struggle our entire marriage. And my biological father came back into the picture when I was about 29, and he molested me then. And I suspect that he also molested my children, 2 of my kids, but they have not. I've asked them, but they don't admit to it, so I don't know if it's repressed
Mm.
or I'm not really sure. Um, so my ex-husband and I got back together at that point, and
Also, you were separated at that
we
time?
separated, and that's when my biological father molested me, and then um, and that was just a mess. That was just a mess. And then we did get back together. We had 5 more children after that. Um, and then
So you had 3 before and 5 after?
yeah,
Okay. Because you
yeah.
said 8, and I'm like, 8 plus 3 more is, or no, 5 more.
Um, so we got back together, and then we stayed together until 2010. And the wheels started coming off a little bit before that. And it was a very confusing time. I spent a lot of those years depressed, struggling with anxiety. In 2004, 2004, I struggled with anxiety to the point where I didn't sleep or eat for 3 months. Like I could eat until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then after that, I was toast. My oldest daughter took care, and my oldest son took care of the younger kids at that point. I could pull my doo-doo together long enough to nurse my youngest child, and that was about all that I did for him for those few months. My ex-husband seemed to be supportive. I found out later that he was taking my oldest daughter out and telling her that I was faking the anxiety, that I really didn't want to be around my kids, that I couldn't stand them, and that it was all just a game, so that I didn't have to actually do anything. But I struggled with anxiety and depression for a lot of those years. In 2010, he left again for about 8 or 9 months. Um, right before that, I had lost a baby at 26 weeks. And as I was losing that baby, my oldest daughter had turned 18 and informed us that she was a drug addict. And there was just a lot of mess that ensued with that whole thing. After my ex-husband left, my daughter had a psychotic break, and I spent a night in the hospital with her, not knowing she did not know who anybody was.
Oh, wow.
And it was literally like looking into an empty, soulless person. My daughter was not there. Um, she came back from that, and I thought, okay, she was like, okay, I'm not going back to drugs, because she felt like that's what had initiated that. And she lasted about 3 months and went back into drugs again. My ex-husband came back again um, after informing me that he had been cheating on me. He acknowledged that he had been cheating on me for about a year, but he was done. And we lasted about 2.5 more years before he left the final time.
When he left these times, were these he just left and you didn't even know where he went, or did you have a conversation? He's like, I'm out of here, or I mean,
we had a conversation. He would tell me he was just done, and he couldn't do this anymore, and so he left. And
and he did that 3 times.
yeah, yeah, the
Wow.
third time it stuck. The first time, it was really a mutual thing. I would say really all three were mutual, because when he left the second time, I started a journal on WordPress, and noticed that I already had some entries in there, and went back and read those entries, and I could have rewritten those same exact things again. Like, this issue had been there this whole time, and I was afraid God would be mad at me if we got divorced. And so I just stayed.
There's that authoritarian thing again, even though you're doing the whole middle finger thing. See, that's where God knows when we're screwed up.
Yeah.
You're pushing God away. It's like you had an anxious avoidant attachment thing with God.
Oh,
I'm going to be
absolutely.
close to you, God. No, go away, God. I want to be close to you,
Yes.
God. No, go away. I
100%.
care what you think. No, I don't care what you think.
Hmm.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
and I actually, and we'll talk more about this later, but I just did a live in my group where I was talking about the verses that say, in order to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. And when you read those verses and you have been used and abused by so many people, you're like, lose myself? You've got to be kidding me. I don't care if you're God. I can't do that again.
I already lost myself. I've been trying
I
to
don't know
find where
who
I
I am.
went. Yeah,
I
that's
have to
why.
know who I am to lose it.
Yeah, that's why
So,
trauma informedness and with faith is so important,
yes.
because it has been twisted and mangled, and you
Oh,
apply
my.
it without that trauma informedness, and it doesn't make any sense, and it just injures someone who's suffering from trauma. They're like, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My ex-husband left the third time, and the final time in 2000. Oh dear, I'm going to have to do math.
Oh, you
2000.
don't have to, the date doesn't matter so much. It's just the points of things, because
Yeah.
people don't need the dates. They need to know, well, how did you know?
Yeah.
When did you awaken to knowing you were abused? Was it after he left and you're looking back, or?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
when my daughter, when she had her psychotic break, she did go to counseling, and she invited me to go with her one time. And at the end, they said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, she gets in these verbal rages." She was very, very much like my mother. She gets in these verbal rages. How do I protect myself and my children and still support her? And they said, "Duck and run for cover." And at that point, I was like, that's not an answer.
Yeah.
That's not an answer. And so my ex-husband was gone, and I knew I was going to have to do something to support my children. So I decided to go back to school at that point to get a degree in therapy, because I wanted to help people like me. I didn't know what to do with my daughter who was a drug addict, because we didn't have addicts in our family, or so I thought. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know how to protect us. I didn't know how to keep the rest of my children from following her. So I went back to school, and that's where it began to dawn on me that I had been abused. And the final straw was after my ex-husband had left. My last class, my last academic class that I took was the diagnosis and treatment of sexual addiction. And I read the book. I don't know how I made it through the class, because all I did was read and cry, because that's when I realized that I had been sexually abused for years. And that's a big deal, because he was your husband. How could you possibly be sexually abused? It is very, very possible, and it is very, very real. And about that time too is when I think I began to realize that he was a covert, covert narcissist. That he was very, very good. Nobody, his family has no idea of who he truly is. None.
It's sort of like that
Um,
whole going to church being at home again. At home
yeah,
is one thing, at church we're the plastic Barbie and Kens. That's what a covert narcissist is. They're so perfect in public. Everyone thinks they're wonderful. How could
yeah,
anything be going wrong?
yeah. He set me up. And I think this is when it really hit after the fact. My ex mother-in-law made a comment to me, and she and I are still on speaking terms. We, not constant, but we can speak, we can be civil to each other. There's no necessarily hatred there. I don't have a whole lot of respect for her, which is very sad, because I had a world of respect for her. But he would, they lived in Florida, and so they would come up and see us, and he would take time off to spend time with his parents while they were up. And so he was home, and I would tell the kids would come to me, and I'd go, "Play with daddy, he's home." Well, what they saw and the picture he painted for them was, she didn't even take care of the kids. She just shoves them on me all the time. Had no idea this was happening. And it happened for years, and I had no clue, none at all. So recognizing who and what he was really sent me into, it was a weird kind of downward spiral. And yet at the same time, this time when I dug my feet in and I said, I'm not going to be destroyed by this. I'm going to find a way out of this. And I still was holding God at arm's length. I served on praise teams. I worked in children's church. I ran children's church. I did all of the things, trying to
Mhm.
get God to love me, trying to get God to accept me, trying to get God to bless me and forgive me and
With all
have
that
a
earning stuff, which
relationship.
would have been pounded into you
Mhm.
as a child, because it's all about the exterior, which is
Yeah,
not the truth. I
yeah,
would like to back up a little bit, if you don't mind,
sure.
simply because I think some people may need the clarification.
Mhm.
You mentioned about the sexual abuse within your marriage. Can you give some sort of an example? You don't have to get graphic or anything like that. Please don't get too graphic. But but just to, for someone who's listening or watching on the video, for them to go, that's abuse
Yeah,
for them, because you didn't know it was. And so if
yeah.
you could turn the light on a little bit there, because maybe someone, you can help them escape if they're in that same situation.
I will do my best. It is it's still a sore spot, a very sore spot. There was a lot of
You can be
we
very vague.
well, we had 8 children, and he would tell me that we didn't have sex often enough. There's 8 kids, and there were 3 miscarriages in there, 4 miscarriages. So
Oh, wow. That's a
um
lot of babies to lose.
Yes. And
So he would push himself on you.
yes. And
It
there
would
were,
be non-consensual except for you felt you had to. So
yes, and
is that a good way of putting it? Nice and
that's a very
gently
good,
without getting into it. So it was non-consensual except for you felt you had to.
yes. And
So
it was very
you don't have to
verbal,
go any deeper than that. I
right?
don't want to
But
make you hurting here.
it was also very verbal as well. The accusations that he, like, there was one time that well, more than one time when he said to me, we would argue about money because he liked to, he earned all the money. I was a stay-at-home mom with all those kids and homeschooling and everything. And so it was his money. He deserved to do what he wanted. Okay, but we have to pay the bills first. And then that would start an argument. And then he would tell me he couldn't make money because I wouldn't have sex with him. And that it confused me because I would be like, but I don't pay
How
you
does that
for
even
sex. I
like
don't
make any
understand.
sense? But he was
Because
blaming you. He was blaming
yes,
you to try and coerce you into
yes,
guilt sex. So
yes, yeah.
so
And he would tell me I was broken. There was something wrong with me, that I should like sex. And I didn't, because it was always forced on me.
oh,
And
and plus you were abused. You were
yeah,
molested. You had
yeah,
issues in that
yeah,
area. So wow.
yes.
So
Well, and
thank
to
you.
this, oh yeah, absolutely. And to this day, he is that person that, well, that was years ago though. You should be over that by now. And to this day, he is still that same person. He has no respect for my degree at all. We have, my daughter is currently a recovering addict, and I think I have to put that in quotes because pick a day. And then, and that's really, the sarcasm is to hide the pain there. And then my oldest son is an alcoholic. My fourth son is now, I believe, a registered sex offender himself. Um, he has very serious mental health issues that my ex-husband tells him he just needs to get some rest and he'll be fine.
Oh, they need professional help.
Eh, but there is no such thing as professional help to him. My seventh child, my daughter, who still lives at home, um, after being verbally and emotionally abused by his current wife, um, began cutting herself and having suicidal ideation. We spent an evening in the hospital with her because she was threatening to kill herself. She is now in therapy herself, and her father says, "You just need to get over it. There's really nothing wrong. You just need to suck it up and get over it."
That's not true.
So no, not by
Right,
a long shot. But
right.
this is his concept of mental health.
Mhm.
And again, in that frame of understanding, which has come with my own healing, he's got a crap ton of trauma in his own life that
Mhm.
he's not dealing with, and that he can't face, because this is how we deal with trauma. You know, there is this piece that we have to take responsibility for healing our wounds.
Mhm.
And yet, because this was where I came from with it, is if I have to heal my wounds, that means I have to take responsibility for what was done to me. And why do I have to take responsibility for what somebody else did? And they're not the same thing, but
Mhm.
it's very difficult to tease those two things apart. You are never, ever, 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 I can't say that enough, responsible for what somebody else did to you.
Amen. Never, 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 never,
Never.
never, never, never. We'll do it in
Yes.
stereo here.
Yes.
You are never to blame
Never.
for your trauma. Never.
You are responsible for healing that wound. And the blessing in that I discovered was that when I heal my wound, nobody can take it from me because I
Amen.
healed it. If my mother came in here right now and laid at my feet, crying, begging me for forgiveness for what she had done to me growing up, promised me the moon and the stars, would I appreciate it? Absolutely. Would it heal me? Not at all. It would feel good in the moment, but that wound is still there, and that's my responsibility to heal.
Mhm.
And so that was huge for me. It's not where he is. Um, so really that's it. In the midst of all of this, I finished my degree. I began working with children, and I currently work with adults, uh, doing therapy. I also we talked about, or you had mentioned about the meditation. I
Mhm.
think that I had tried to do, and that was 20 years ago, trying to find a way out of the anxiety that I was feeling when my sixth child was little. And I could not do, I couldn't do the meditation. I couldn't still my mind enough. Um, and I was so caught up in things having to be perfect that I I just, like, in this meditation, it was a guided meditation where I would meet with Jesus and imagine him, like, him and I being one, Christ in me and I in him.
Mhm.
And I would get so hung up on, does he have a beard? What's he wearing? What color is his hair? What color are his eyes? Is he wearing sandals? And I just could not do the meditation. And I did therapy, repeatedly tried therapy, and it would feel good in the moment. And then it just stopped working. Going to school to be a therapist, learning all of the different models and trying everything out myself. It would work for a little bit, and then it just would stop working. In 2021, I began Celebrate Recovery, and that was about an 8-month program that I was in. And that was the thing that began to break the ice off of my heart where God is concerned.
Mm.
And I was frustrated that I didn't get the healing that my friends were getting from it. Um, and yet there was,
It
I
was a
feel like,
beginning.
yeah, and I could begin to consider that God wasn't really mad at me, that he really did love me, and that it was after my heart. And that started to break the wall down. And as I was graduating from that, I went back to that meditation, and suddenly it worked. It
Mm.
didn't matter what Jesus was wearing, what color his hair, his eyes were.
Yeah,
I could
because you had crossed into it's something I had put in my book and in one of my courses about entertaining the possibility
imagine.
that just maybe he just loved me. Maybe. And you start with that little bit of maybe, because it's kind of like merging into it. It's like how God can pull us into it, like a little bit of merging, because you're like, no way to, you can't go from no way to, oh yeah, unless, you have some divine, I don't know, interaction there or something. I don't know.
Right,
I can't say can't happen, but I don't think that's how it usually happens. We have to
right.
merge into it because it's too far.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
and so that maybe, and then it kind of pulled you in. And so then and maybe in the meditations, you were curious for that connection instead of
yeah.
trying so hard to get it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was still desperate for it, no doubt, but I think you're right with the curiosity. It was just, what would this be like if I could? And the timing of it, God's timing of it was just absolutely amazing, because I went from the Celebrate Recovery to that meditation, and that's when I found the trauma healing method.
Mm.
And Melissa Searles is the woman who developed it, and I got involved in her group, and she was hitting at all the heartstrings. I mean, I was just like, dude, how did you get into my house? How'd you get in my brain? Um, and so I started the program, and within a week and a half, I went from calling myself stupid and other not so nice words to sweetheart. And I knew in that moment, first time I called myself sweetheart, like in a self-soothing moment, just taking a deep breath. It's okay. We got this, sweetheart. We're good. Wait, sweetheart? Me? Really? And at that moment, I was like, I know I'm getting certified. I have got to share this with the world. And so I finished my own healing program, which is where the true healing came with my mom, um, understanding the trauma that she had been through and allowing my heart to heal through that. Going from a place, and this I think was the biggest thing to me, was that having realized how abusive my ex-husband had been with me, and feeling so controlled and intimidated and pushed down by him at every turn, all of this coinciding with a court case over child support that I had initiated. And walking into court that first time right after I had started my program, and feeling confident until I saw him, and then feeling like everything in me collapsed again. And my facilitator happened to message me, and I messaged her back and I said, I know I healed, but it didn't work. Again, it didn't work, because that was my thing. Nothing ever worked for me. And she messaged me back and she said, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and pardon the expression, but this is what had come out. She said, close your eyes and remember that you are that badass bitch. And I did just that, and I could feel that strength come right back into me. And he lied like a rug on the stand. And there really wasn't, I didn't have an opportunity or any proof to say that he was lying. So I walked out of the courtroom pretty frustrated. And as my current husband was driving me home, I said, I just want somebody to call him out on his crap. And just as that came out of my mouth, I knew it had to be me. It didn't matter who else did it. It had to be me. So a couple weeks later, we went to mediation, where I got a lot of affirmation from the mediator and my attorney, because he was representing himself. And they were both like, how did you marry this man? They both literally, after 2.5 hours, were like, there's just no point. It's like talking to a wall. Okay, so back to court we go. The next court date was in January. And by this time, I'd been in the program for 2 months. My relationship with God had deepened so incredibly. It was almost like I could feel him walking next to me. And leading up to that, I did all of use the tools and the exercises that I'd been learning. I prayed. I had gone to Celebrate Recovery, where I can promise you the playlist for the music we did for worship that night was orchestrated completely by God, just for me, nobody else. And I made sure everybody else knew it. That was for me. God did that for me, because it felt really good to know God did something for me. And I, my current husband was sick that day, so I was alone. It was me. And I listened to my songs on the way into the courthouse. And as I was walking up the steps, I heard God speak to my heart. And he said, you've already won, no matter what happened, because you're showing up for yourself. And I walked into the courtroom. They called our case. My ex-husband started, and the judge just shut him down. Every time he opened his mouth, the judge shut him down. And if I could have sat there with my jaw on the floor, I would have, because it was literally that place of seeing God's army just come in and go, nope, not this time. And he stomped out of the courtroom because he was mad he didn't get his way. And as I walked out of the courtroom, my husband had gotten dressed and shown up to the courthouse to support me. When he had gotten to the room, he saw that we were already standing there. So he just stayed outside in the hallway. So I walked out the door, and I was never alone. Never. So at that point, my attorney offered to press criminal charges against my ex-husband for not paying child support. And I said I had to think about it. And my husband said, what are you going to do? And I said, truth be told, I'd love to see him in jail. I'd love to see him in jail. But it's not going to serve me. And I know that in my heart. That's for God to do, not me.
Yeah, you can't go after it for revenge. Is it the right thing to do? If you're doing it for revenge, then we're grabbing something that doesn't belong to us.
And that peace that just, when I spoke out loud to my husband, that's not what serves me best. I knew that I was taking that step that God wanted me to take. So from there, the rest of it's kind of like, I don't want to say downhill, because it's really kind of more uphill. It's all good. It's not downhill bad. But I've been through the certification program. I got my certification, full certification in December, for the trauma healing method and for the master practitioner for neurolinguistic programming, which has to do with how we speak, the words we use. And working on getting my trauma certification as a trauma therapist. Yeah, I think that's that's pretty much it. Did I miss
Wow.
anything?
Well, you suddenly had another husband in there.
I did.
When did
Okay.
that other husband come in?
Yes.
Because your ex-husband, he left
Yes,
in
I
there
did.
somewhere, and we heard about that, and then suddenly there was another husband. So what happened with this husband? Where'd this other husband come from? And he sounds pretty wonderful. So let's hear something about
He
him.
is. Yeah. So after the divorce, I was in that place of I lived with this man for 25 years and had no idea what had been doing to me this whole time. And so I was in this place of, I don't want to be alone, but I don't want to deal with that again. And if I
Mhm.
can't know somebody after 25 years, how long do I have to date before I'm going to be comfortable enough to, get
Yeah.
married again? And so I literally begged God for months, just take this desire to be with a partner again, just take it away. I just want to be alone. And it wouldn't go away, wouldn't go away. So um, one night I was like, God, I'm just going to be a brat. You're not taking this away. So here's my list. And I gave him a list of what I wanted in a man. And some of it, he has to love my children. He has to be financially stable. He has to be a godly man. There were some serious things in it. He
Mhm.
also had to long hair. He had to ride a motorcycle. He had to have a tattoo, and he had to play the guitar, and he had to sing. So there were some non-negotiables and some negotiables in there. I moved 3 hours away shortly after, about 6 months after I got divorced. I moved 3 hours away to be closer to my parents, and got a job as a CNA, still in school, and was working at a nursing home, and met my husband at the nursing home. He was not a patient. His
Good to
mother
know.
was the patient,
Good to
to be
know.
clear, because I had people be like, was he that old? And I was like, no, 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 it was his mom. I was taking care of his mom. And the night that I met him, we just started having conversation as I was in and out of the room.
Mhm.
I was not asking him questions. He was just offering him information. And in my head, I'm mentally checking off my list. And I'm going, this is really weird. And to the point where he's like, if you don't work on this end of the hall tomorrow night, come find me and say hi. And I was like, okay. And I walked out the door and said to the lady training me, it will be a cold day in hell before I come to this end of the hall again, because it had freaked me out so much. He was checking off all of these boxes. I wasn't asking questions. He was just offering this information. And I'm like, this is just weird. There was no way anybody knew what was on that list. So, needless to say, we did start dating. I got over my fear. Um, he did not drive a motorcycle. He did not have a tattoo. He now has both. We both do. And
I think
we
maybe you put some things
have,
on that list because were you trying to make it hard for God?
yes, matching tattoos. I can't get my wrist that way. Matching tattoos. We learned how to ride motorcycles together. He does sing to me. He does not play the guitar, but I bought one and told him he doesn't have options. So there's that. So he did try for a couple years to be like, your boys play a guitar. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just weird. They can't serenade me. You have to serenade me. So you have to play it. So we're still working on that part.
Oh, that sounds just so wonderful. God just took care of you and just came came through. That's just
He
so
did.
like him. So like him. I was laughing in the you freaking out in there because my story is completely different, but a little bit of the same because it has the whole God part of it in
Yeah.
there. And I had that time where I was freaking out too. So I laughed because I related to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you doing to help people now? I know that you are starting programs and you have your own group. How are you helping other people?
So right now, I'm still doing therapy. I also have a group on Facebook for Christian women who are healing from trauma, and I have a program called the Broken Chains Academy through that. where I do the trauma healing method with my own flavor, because I teach coping skills as well. And it's my flavor. We add God into this fully, because there is no healing, truly healing, without God. Um, in the midst of that, God laid on my heart, after a conversation with a friend, about the lack of trauma information in churches.
Amen.
And it's not so
Amen.
much that churches are causing trauma, although some of them clearly do. Um, and it's not that God is not enough. But if somebody is struggling, if somebody has experienced a great deal of trauma in their life, they're struggling with depression, they're struggling with anxiety, go home and pray about it isn't
It
fixing
doesn't
it.
work.
It's
Yeah.
just not, because if we don't have that relationship with God, we're praying to the ceiling. It's bouncing off the ceiling, or so we feel. It's
Hmm.
really hard to heal without that connection. And so I'm starting a program for pastors, which still doesn't have a name. And if anybody has any suggestions, I am open to them. Um, but this program is just really to help pastors to understand trauma, where trauma comes from, how it starts, like physiologically in the brain, what it looks like, the effects of trauma, how people act out their traumas. Um, that
Sounds very similar to my trauma informed self workshop that I'm doing.
Yeah, I'll have to
You're,
look.
you're explaining the things right through there.
Yes, yes, and then just really teaching them a way that they can build trauma informed into their church, so that it starts from the minute a person walks into the door. There's a fantastic book called Caring for People God's Way by Tim Clinton. And it follows that form where from the minute somebody walks into church, that person at the door that's greeting and notices that there's something off with Mrs. Smith today. And maybe I can just kind of connect with her and pass her to the next level if she needs it. And so that it kind of works up to the pastor where they can assess, is this something I can help here in pastoral counseling, or does this require therapy? So that's the pastor's program. And I don't know if anybody's an NCIS fan, but Gibbs would smack Tony upside the head, and everybody called it the Gibbs smack. God Gibbs smacks me on the daily. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said, I would love to be a life coach and I don't know where to start. And I said, well, that's something that God's laid on my heart to do. And I was like, where did that come from? Wasn't something I've been thinking about, but apparently God was. So boom, Gibbs smack, how'd it come? So there is that on the horizon as well. Yeah.
Wow. So how can people connect with you? Where are you located online? Do you do things in person or only online? If you're in person, where are you?
Yeah. I just do things online. For therapy, I am only licensed in the state of Tennessee, but they can find me on Facebook at Kim Nave, LPC Life Coach. My group on Facebook for the life coaching, where there is a lot of free training that I offer in there, is Christian Women Healing from Trauma. That's a Facebook group. I am on YouTube, Kim Nave Life Coach, and I am on TikTok, which is new for me. And that is Kim Nave 160. And I'm, considering Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm just like, just a little bit at a time. I'm a little on the old side. It's the old dog, new tricks thing, but I'll get there.
Yeah. And see, that's something to point out too. There, we can always learn. We can always
Yes.
learn. We can't learn everything all at once,
Yes.
but learning empowers us to learn more.
Yeah.
Dr. Caroline Leaf even says that learning
Yes.
it adds strength to your brain. It builds your brain.
Yes.
It's
Our brains
healthy
have,
for you. It's not just good to learn stuff. It's actually
yeah. Yeah.
healthy for you.
Yeah. Our brains have so much neuroplasticity, which means so much opportunity to learn. And I'm a
Mhm.
nerd. So if you're a nerd and you like to nerd out on stuff, I am your girl. I'm just saying. Because in addition to all this other stuff, I'm also working on a certificate for neuropsychology and another one for neurobiology. I am a nerd. Love to know how things work and how people work, and yeah, and just connecting with people, which is really interesting too, because having been shut down for so long that people connect with people. No, I'd like to be the one hiding under the couch. Thank you very much. And now I'm the one doing Facebook lives, and I'm on TikTok, and I'm posting my videos on YouTube, and people are commenting, and I'm going, this is cool. I had like 600 views on one of my TikToks, and I ran in the house and I was to my daughter, oh, and she's like, wow, mom. I'm like, I'm viral. She's like, not yet. Not yet.
Well, it is to us. And it's amazing how
Yes.
God does that. He will take where our wound is at, where we have been shut down, and he will amplify that. It's like he takes the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. I was shut down with speaking and humiliation in front of people. I love speaking in front of people now because of
Yeah.
the healing that God has put in me. So I relate to that, and I celebrate with you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It just, my goal, I want this worldwide. I absolutely, this has to be worldwide. People have to heal. The way that we're going now, if we're not healing, we're just going to keep devolving. Is that a word? Going backwards, disintegrating, something like that. I make words up all the time too. So
I appreciate that because I do too. So it's
mine's called the
fun.
Kimtionary. My kids say I have a book. It's called the Kimtionary with all my made up words.
That's hilarious. So is there anything that you want to add here, or something that's on your heart that came up, or maybe we forgot to cover, or something you want to leave our listeners with before we tie this up with a nice, neat little bow?
I think the biggest thing is that there is always hope. And my favorite verse is Zephaniah 3:17. I'm not going to try to quote it because it won't come out right. But I love the idea that Jesus is singing over me, and he
Mhm.
is singing over you. And if you're looking for hope and you need hope, that's where it is. And if you need help finding that, hit me up. I'm happy to help.
Amen. Oh, thank you so much for sharing today, Kim. This was wonderful. People need to hear this. I can't wait for this to get out there. It's going to help so many people. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
And listeners, thank you for being with us today and for sticking with us. And remember, I love you. You matter. And so till next time, bye-bye.